Sir, let's start briefly with last night in Winston-Salem. Really not a lot of expectations at all on Wake Forest going into the season. What were your thoughts on what we saw?
I think we saw a game that you can caveat the heck out of it. I mean, that's what you're going to get every time a power conference team plays an FCS team. But, the offense ran pretty efficiently with Hank Bachmeier at quarterback for the most part. I mean, Michael Kern got the start, and they had a touchdown drive in his 3 possessions on the field. And then Hank Bachmeier comes in, the first drive doesn't go anywhere, and then there are 5 straight scoring drives. And 4 of those were touchdowns. So Dave Clawson was non-committal to naming a starting quarterback for next weekend against Virginia, which is obviously a more important game moving forward. But that's kind of to be expected. I think if nothing else, we learned last night that Hank Bachmeier should and in all likelihood will be Wake's starting quarterback moving forward.
All right, so sometimes stats can confuse us, and I think this stat confuses me. Conor O'Neill, Deacons Illustrated, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. We'll flip to Devils Illustrated when we talk about tonight's game. So Wake only had possession of the football for 23 and a half minutes. They compiled 550 yards of total offense. So should we be... their defense couldn't get off the field? Because Steve Logan taught us a long time ago that time of possession is a defensive stat, not an offensive stat. Did Wake just score so quickly that they were just on the field more naturally, or are there defensive issues?
I think it sways more toward the former. It sways more toward Wake's offense when it clicks, is up-tempo and wants to run quickly.
Right.
And I think the first 2 touchdown drives they had were both around a minute and a half. I mean, if you're scoring touchdowns, you shouldn't be all that concerned about how long you have the football for. And if you've got a running back that can break a 48-yard play and a receiver who can get you 50 yards on a single play, that's a good problem to have in football. I do think there's a little concern about the defense. I mean, there was at one point, A&T had 3 straight third down conversions, and it's such a lose-lose scenario when you play these FCS games because if you blow the team out 70-0, everybody says, well, that's what you're supposed to do, so you get no credit. And if you lose or it's a close game, then the sky is falling and you're not as good as you thought you were for the last 3 or 4 months. I think Wake's defense will be better. I think Wake's defense was also not tested in the area that I think is going to be their Achilles heel in the deep passing game. That's really not what A&T does. So that's still a little untested. More so than anything, to go back to your original question, I mean, I don't think Wake has cared too much about time of possession in the last 6 or 7 years, really.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where it might not matter at all. And I will point out that in the best of the Larry Fedora era at UNC, when they were, I mean, just posting huge offensive numbers on the scoreboard, it seemed every week, their time of possession wasn't great. As it turned out, their defense was terrible too. So it was sort of one didn't help the other. They would have a touchdown drive, 7 plays, 80 yards in a minute 57. And so your defense has to get right back in the field, and they weren't good anyway. So it just wasn't helping them out. I was just curious. There were too many things going on. I can't handle 2 screens, let alone 3 screens. So I was living vicariously through Conor O'Neill. Deacons Illustrated. Oh, wait. Now you're Conor O'Neill, Devils Illustrated. What are your thoughts going into tonight's game against Elon with Malik Murphy at quarterback? You still have Jordan Moore and Jaquez Moore, all the Moores on the offensive side. But There's a lot to replace for the Blue Devils, especially on both sides of the ball. But let's start with offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to gauge when you play an FCS team because they don't have the depth. They typically are a little smaller in some spots up front, but you're really going to want to watch Duke's offensive and defensive lines because that's where they had to do the most replacing. I mean, they had a spring game where they had 5 offensive linemen suited up and had to play half the spring game with the defensive line taking 2 steps forward and then kneeling because there were no offensive linemen to block them. And defensive line wise, you're talking about replacing your top 3 defensive tackles, 2 of them who are on NFL rosters, and the third who's at Virginia Tech this year, and then replacing your top defensive end in R.J. Oben, who's at Notre Dame. So you're going to want to look at line play tonight, as boring as that sounds, and as mundane as that might be to evaluate when you're playing a FCS team. All due respect to the alma mater here and the Fighting Christians. Phoenixes, I'm sorry.
You forgot. You forgot they changed.
I've been calling them the Fighting Phoenixes, so I kind of slipped up there. We'll call it Freudian, I guess.
I'm telling you, man, the Elon Mafia is everywhere.
They've got a good journalism school. We're all led by Wes Durham at this point.
Absolutely.
And then, it is the flashiness of introducing a new quarterback who comes from Texas, who was a really high-rated recruit. He is 6'5", 230 pounds, and has a howitzer of a right arm. Because we're in this state and because, you have people who are fans of the Carolina Panthers, they're going to want to compare him to Cam Newton.
Right.
I'm going to tell you right now, he's not Cam Newton. He does not run.
Right.
But he
the last quarterback was more like Cam Newton.
Yeah, exactly. But he can throw the hell out of the ball. And I think Jordan Moore might be the best receiver in the ACC. So it's going to be pretty electric through the air for this team. I've got questions about their defense, but aside from the defensive line, they should have some good depth and good experience. So it's an interesting team. I think they're going to have to score a lot of points to win a lot of games this year. And, they kind of have some pieces on offense to do it. It's just whether their offensive line can hold up.
Yeah, it is all going to be about the trenches for the Blue Devils. That's cliche because that goes to, that speaks to every team. NC State's not going to max out their season if their offensive line isn't good. North Carolina's offensive line was okay, not great yesterday. It's got to be so much better if they want to, especially now without a quarterback at this point. They have a quarterback, but I don't think they have much of a passing game, which means you don't really have a quarterback. You have another running back. It's going to be hard for them unless their offensive line is great. It's going to be hard for them to get the most out of Amari and Hampton.
We talk so much in football about everything else, and then it's like the season starts, and we remember, the 2 most fundamental things in this game will always be whether you can move people on blocks and whether you can tackle people to the ground. It really is that simple.
And not that you thought we were going to talk about this, but if you watched Florida State, Georgia Tech, what was obvious to me watching the game was Georgia Tech either is better or just played better on the offensive and defensive lines. They were Georgia Tech's offensive line won the battle with FSU's defensive front, and vice versa. They won the battle on the defensive side of the ball too. And it didn't. It's amazing that game came down to a field goal, if you think about it. But maybe that speaks to Florida State's talent level. But if Duke's going to be successful, they got to be good on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, there were a lot of shades in that opener last weekend to last year's opener in Durham, when Duke was just supposed to be the academic school and developmental program that had a tough schedule and was just supposed to be happy with 7 wins and take their butt licking in front of a national audience. And somebody forgot to tell them, and they just pushed around Clemson for 4 quarters and wound up with a earth-shattering, shot heard around the ACC and to open the season.
Conor O'Neill, before I let you go, so Duke has a difficult schedule again. I think they play, if we thought going into the season that we had 7 teams at the top of the league who were going to fight, because of the lack of overlap in schedules, fight to get to maybe 7-1. Duke, I think, has 5 of them on the schedule. That doesn't include Georgia Tech and North Carolina. They have a very difficult league schedule. If you had to say, what would be a good year for Manny Diaz in year one?
I think a good year is 6-6, and you get to whatever bowl you can get to, and you kind of sustain the momentum that was created over the last 2 years. I think you lose a bit of it when you have a losing season, when you spend all of December and the only thing you're talking about is everything else in college football that happens in December nowadays. But I think you've just got to sustain momentum. I don't think it's a program that has any illusions of going 11-1 or 10-2. It's just about sustainability and building something that is going to be translatable and laying some foundations for next season and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they can get to a bowl game, it's a huge success. The non-conference schedule is sort of set up for that as well. Conor O'Neill, Devils Illustrated, at Conor O'Neill _DI. Thank you much, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.